morning comes from the book of Romans, chapter 5, and I'll be sharing the Message version with you this morning. You know the story of how Adam landed us in this dilemma we're in. First sin, then death, and no one exempt from either sin or death. That sin disturbed relations with God in everything and everyone. But the extent of the disturbance was not clear until God spelled it out in detail to Moses. So death, this huge abyss separating us from God, dominated the landscape from Adam to Moses. Even those who didn't sin precisely as Adam did by disobeying a specific command of God still had to experience this termination of life, this separation from God. But Adam, who got us into this, also points ahead to the one who will get us out of it. Yet, the rescuing gift is not exactly parallel to the death-dealing sin. If one man's sin put crowds of people at the dead-end abyss of separation from God, just think what God's gift, poured through one man, Jesus Christ, will do. There's no comparison between that death-dealing sin and this generous, life-giving gift. The verdict on that one sin was the death sentence. The verdict on the many sins that followed was this wonderful life sentence. If death got the upper hand through one man's wrongdoing, can you imagine the breathtaking recovery life makes, sovereign life, in those who grasp with both hands this wildly extravagant life gift, this grand setting everything right that the one man, Jesus Christ, provides?
May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So on Easter Sunday, many of you were surprised by the connection that was made between the risen Christ, who in John's Gospel appears to Mary Magdalene as a gardener, and the world's first gardener, Adam. I had asserted that connection between Jesus and Adam was by no means accidental, but rather reflected an understanding that was widely felt by the early Christian community that Jesus was the second Adam, a part of God's putting things right with the world in a profound and extraordinary way. Now, one of the reasons why this understanding of Jesus as the second Adam matters to us in modern times is because, quite frankly, those ancient times, in the earliest times, tended to be a far more happier lot than we see many Christians being today in our time. And if we can take a few moments to pause from our busy lives and ask, what was present then that seems to have been lost in our time, even though, then maybe we can weather those storms in our own lives that they were weathering, only maybe doing a little more singing in the rain rather than just crouching down and waiting it out. Maybe we can find that same kind of joy that they felt. And that joy is very much reflected in this theological understanding of Jesus as the second Adam. Now, in order to get at this, though, we're going to have to set, if we're going to want to experience what they experienced, rather than just simply understand what they experienced, to experience what they experienced, we need to set aside the theology and the Bible stuff for the time being, anyway, and step into ourselves. I want to take you to a few places perhaps you'll find in yourself where you get so close to that garden you can just see right into it. Just see right in. If we can find those places together this morning, then all that biblical theological stuff will become a lot more clear and a lot more real. Of course, I can't describe your experiences for you, so I can only describe my own. But I trust through describing my own, we'll find enough common ground together in our base of experience to be seeing something quite similar. Now, one of the places I regularly find myself just a few millimeters from the Garden of Eden is when I get outside of the city, get outside even of the countryside, and move into some place that's deeply wild, into the wilderness. For many, many years ago, I used to go up regularly and find these experiences up in the wilds of Alaska. In fact, it was really these Eden-like experiences up in the wilds that drew me there for 13 consecutive summers. Well, those experiences plus the need to pay for an education. Nevertheless, I remember a couple of those summers, I was on a 214-foot floating processor called the Blue Wave. Now, in peak season, I must admit, when we were processing salmon or herring or black cod or what have you, 24 hours a day, that floating processor did not resemble Eden at all, but more like Dante's ninth circle of hell. However, that floating processor took us to some pretty Edenic places, like this one. This is Fox Farm Bay in just north of Kodiak Island in Alaska. You know, in Fox Farm Bay, if you stood up on the top deck of that floating processor, you could turn 360 degrees and just see raw, wild wilderness and ocean. And if there's a little breeze wafting away the diesel smells of the engines, you just get this clear, salt, briny smell laced with Douglas fir and pine and granite. And if once the engines switched over to the generators at night, everything just became silent. You hear nothing but the wind punctuated by the calls of seagulls and maybe the waters lapping against the hull of the ship. It was just simply a magical place. I remember one day we were down on the bottom deck and we were freezing herring, big pans full of herring for shipment to Japan. And some of the crew on a break were having a fun time. They would take a single frozen herring, they'd throw it out into the bay, and as soon as that herring plopped in the water, about 100 seagulls just swooped down and you're fighting for this herring. The only problem was, like, one would get the herring at its beak and try to fly off, but because it was so big and frozen, it would slip right out of the beak, falling back in the water, and then there'd be 100 rivals trying to get that, trying to try their luck with this thing to no avail. And so one morning we were doing this, and the whole crew, we were just laughing hysterically, seeing this herring just go all around the bay, being picked up and dropped, picked up and dropped, picked up and dropped, when suddenly, right above us, was this bald eagle who had spotted that herring, looked pretty good to that eagle, and it just shot straight down and swooped right into the midst of those seagulls and grabbed that herring in its talons and effortlessly just flew off with it. And those seagulls were really pissed. But the sight of that eagle, as it just came speeding down, grabbed that thing and going away, it was like poetry in motion. That whole thing took place in the span of maybe 2 seconds. And yet, it's been forever etched in my deep memory. It took my breath away. And 26 years later, I'm still struggling to keep up with that breath that I lost. Just extraordinary. Just those experiences, can you find them in yourself? You just millimeters. You realize that Eden is a lot closer than we think. In fact, all of God's creation is really in the whole vibe of Eden constantly, just as God intended it from the very beginning, constantly around us. There's the garden, right there in front of our eyes. Yeah. But it's not just nature that does this for me. I find also with us flawed, imperfect people, we can find Eden, or I can find Eden regularly myself. Many of you know that one of my favorite things to do is get away to our family cabin on the southern Oregon coast every summer. And there, just south of Bandon, Oregon, Melanie's family lives in the area. Now my brother and my mother live a few hours away, and we've developed good friends in that area over the years. So when we go, it's just kind of this, everybody kind of converges on the cabin. And one of the highlights of our time there is what has become known as the Oyster Fest. And this has become such a tradition and it's so fun that every year, as soon as we arrive, everybody's asking, what day will the Oyster Fest be held on? And here's basically how it goes. On the appointed day, the guests arrive in the early afternoon, and we set a fire going in the fire pit in the middle of our deck, and we put a big pot of butter melting on the stove at a low simmer. We throw a bunch of garlic in that, and that will simmer for hours until it's just right to be drizzled over oysters that are set out on the grill of our fire pit. Once they open up, we take off the shell, and we just drizzle that garlic butter all over it, let it simmer in that. Oh, put that on a club cracker, and you're in heaven, So the guests arrive, the fire's going, the people bring their best potluck food you can ever imagine. Part of the reason for that is because one of the guests regularly is the head of the Department of Culinary of a culinary institute. So she's a professional chef, and so that raises everybody's bar. Everybody's going to bring their best stuff because Nilda, is going to bring something spectacular. So there's that, and so you get the hors d'oeuvres out, the fire's going, maybe a couple of corks are popped from a bottle or two of wine, et cetera, and hence commences the Oyster Fest and hours of conversation that take place on the beach, on the deck, in the cabin, and out again until late into the night when the graham crackers and marshmallows and chocolate come out and are swiftly turned into s'mores, and everybody just kind of goes, oh, and sleeps for about 10 hours after that. But one year, I remember very clearly, I was out on the deck, and I had just slurped down about my fifth oyster cracker, washing it down with a swig of a hoppy microbrew, had taken up the cigar that had been waiting by my side, and was deep involved in conversation, an argument really, about theology and politics with a good friend. They say you should never talk about theology or politics. I like to combine both. Really go. So we were heavy at it, and just having the time of our lives, just arguing about this stuff, and suddenly it was like time just started slowing down and came to a dead stop inside me anyway. Outwardly I was keeping up the conversation, but inwardly it's like my soul was just perfectly still and looking around me. And I saw the faces of the people on that deck. Every face was just radiant with joy. I'm sure they're radiant with joy because they'd eaten a lot of good food, but also radiant with joy because they'd enjoyed this beautiful sunny day, but mostly radiant with joy because they were in the presence of each other, just thoroughly enjoying each other's company. And that's what captivated me, because I knew these people pretty well. And I knew that all of us had, our flaws, our imperfections, our particular struggles in life. And if you were to ask about theology or politics, there were people on that deck whose differences could be measured not in miles, but in light years. And sometimes those differences between us and those flaws and fractures had actually caused division and hurt at times. And yet, everybody was just overjoyed to be with each other, seeing beyond those things, more in love with each other than in dislike of the imperfections. And as the night, the night had produced this effect where the flames of the fire were flickering on the faces of the people, so it's just kind of going dark, bright, dark, bright, dark, bright, all over their faces. I realized that's kind of how we all are. We're all like this dancing interplay of light and dark inside us. Triumph and struggle, flaws and perfections, all just kind of off and on, off and off and off and on. And the wild thing is, I realized that these people were so interesting because of that their darkness actually and their struggle with light and that interplay actually produced a greater light that actually would not have been nearly as interesting if it had just been just pure light. Everybody was perfect on that deck. Nobody struggled. But there was something about that dance that actually created more light, I think, than would have been there otherwise. And it was at that time that I finally came to accept an intuition that had always been with me, but I'd held away. And that was that God loves not just the light inside you and me, but our darkness as well. Loves it because when a heart is oriented towards God, the struggle with light and darkness actually produces more light. And light with character and identity, a self. No, I think that people are basically like living Van Gogh paintings. There's all of us, and we got that flickering darkness and light going on and stuff. But you know how Van Gogh worked. He could take a yellow that was just kind of yellowy, and he would edge it with a dark brown or a dark blue, and suddenly that yellow would become as bright as the sun. And that's what people are like. That light and dark produces even greater light. Have you ever stood in a group of people and realized that you were standing in a bunch of living Van Gogh paintings? And perhaps you too have found yourself just on the edge of Eden. Perhaps you too have realized why God didn't want us originally to distinguish between good and evil. It's not that they didn't exist. It's just they're harder to separate from each other. When it comes to loving human beings, you pretty much have to do what Frank Sinatra tells us we ought to do. Love all or nothing at all.
is from 1 Corinthians, and again I'll be reading the Message version. We follow this sequence in Scripture. The first Adam received life. The last Adam is a life-giving spirit. Physical life comes first, then spiritual. A firm base shaped from the earth. A final completion coming out of heaven. The first man was made out of earth. The people since then are earthy. The second man was made out of heaven, and people now can be heavenly. In the same way that we've worked from our earthy origins, let's embrace our heavenly ends.
That's Good, That's Bad by Marjorie Cole. One day, a little boy went to the zoo with his mother and father. They bought him a shiny red balloon. It lifted him high up into the sky. Wow! Oh, that's good.
Oh, that's bad.
The balloon drifted for miles and miles until it came to a hot, steamy jungle. It broke on the branch of a tall, prickly tree. Pop! Oh, that's bad.
No, that's good.
The little boy fell into a muddy river. Splat! He climbed onto the roly-poly hippopotamus, and he rode to shore. Giddy up! Oh, that's good.
No, that's bad.
10 noisy baboons were squabbling in the grass by the river. They chased the little boy up a tree until he was out of breath. Pant, pant! Oh, that's bad.
No, that's good.
The baboons wanted to play vine swing with the little boy. What fun! The little boy grabbed a vine and swung out of their reach. Whee! Oh, that's good.
No, that's bad.
The vine was a big, scary snake that wiggled and jiggled and hissed. Sss. Oh, that's bad.
No, that's good.
The little boy lost his grips. Whoops! And landed on the back of a giraffe. Hooray! Oh, that's good.
No, that's bad.
The giraffe leaned over to drink some swampy water. Glug, glug. The little boy slid down its neck and fell into some quicksand next to an elephant. Slop. Oh, that's bad.
No, that's good.
The elephant grabbed the little boy with its trunk and lifted him up onto the shoulders. Whoosh. Oh, that's good.
No, that's bad.
The elephant thumped bumpily along to a grassy plain where it stopped to feed. The little boy climbed down its trunk and woke up on a daddy lion snoring in the grass. Zzz. Oh, that's bad.
No, that's good.
The lion saw the little boy. It purred, rawr, and it licked the little boy's face. Slurp. Oh, that's good.
No, that's bad.
The little boy got all wet and sticky. Yuck. And ran deeper into the jungle. It was as dark as night. Oh, and the little boy was afraid. He sat down and started to cry. Boo-hoo. Oh, that's bad.
No, that's good.
His tears made such a big puddle that a stork came along to have a drink. Sip. It picked up the little boy with its beak. Wish. Oh, that's good.
No, that's bad.
The stork flew the little boy across the park. Windy sky, flap, flap. The little boy thought he would never see his parents again. Sob! Oh, that's bad.
No, that's good.
The stork knew where it was going. It took the little boy back to the zoo and dropped him into his parents' arms. Plop. His mother and father were so happy to see him. They gave him a big hug and a big kiss. Smack. Oh, that's good.
No, that's great.
Yeah, and we wonder why God didn't want us to separate good and bad and all that. It's like, how do we really know what leads to what? And how can we really separate all that quite so neatly, not with things and not with life experiences itself. The early Christian knew that Jesus was inviting us back to the garden, to pass through the gate and let go of all that judgment until you experience life for what God meant it to be experienced like. But sometimes I think what gets us through that gate from standing on the outside into the inside isn't so easy. I mean, the original story talks about the gate being blocked by fiery swords. And I don't think anybody passes through the gate back into Eden without being transformed in some way that may be a bit painful at times. I think about, when I think about Eden, I think about those happy times, to be sure, the eagle times and the fire pit times at the oyster fests. But I think what really put me through that gate was not a happy time at all. But one of the worst times, actually the worst time in my life. I think specifically of that time when my eldest daughter was diagnosed with a cancerous brain tumor years ago. Now, a lot of you, most of you are very familiar with that story, so I won't belabor the point here, but I do want to make one observation about that experience. It plunged me into the deepest darkness I've ever been in. The fear of what might happen to my beloved daughter plunged me there and caused me to, at times, lose sight of hope, falling into this kind of ever-deepening pit of despair where I, at times, questioned life's goodness, questioned God's goodness, even in moments questioned God's very existence. And yet, that experience, while I would never wish it, I would never willingly just step into it, nor would I ever wish it on Ariana, and if I could take her brain tumor away in an instant, I would do that without thinking. But yet, I have to admit, that experience gave me one of the most profound glimpses of Eden I've ever seen. It's a glimpse you only get, actually, I think, at rock bottom, where you literally can't go any further down. Because at least in my experience, when I was there and could not get any lower, I discovered something that startled me, that I didn't expect at all. I discovered myself and my family being held by an energy that was clearly not my own. I found myself, inside myself, a source of strength whose source I could not find anywhere within me. And I found a peace that somehow made peace even with the worst case scenarios that I was so afraid of, that clearly was not coming from me. And yet I embraced it all. And when I did, it became abundantly clear, even though it did not suddenly solve all my problems, it did not take away all the pain, it became abundantly clear that there really is little in life that can really scare a person if you see that view, that when you couldn't go any lower, there was still a light that shined well beyond your darkness. That was there comforting, protecting, strengthening, leading, guiding. No, when you get that view, it's like you go from standing on the outskirts of Eden and you pass through the fire and you look out at life with new eyes. Look out at life realizing that the good and the bad and the ugly of it all is surpassed by this incredible brilliance, this incredible blessing, that life, even at its worst, is about far more blessing than it is about curse, because it was created by a loving, generous God. you start to understand why this cross was so significant to the early Christians. So the cross, more than anything else, embodies this very thing, that as deep as your darkness goes, the light shines even more deeply. Now, when I think about those happy experiences, those moments that are frozen like amber, poetry in motion, and those times when I see that interplay of light and dark producing more light than before, I feel like we are so close. We're always just so close to Eden. And when I take into myself the lessons from that deep darkness I pass through and look out at a whole nother world where all is brilliant light. And I see why these early Christians saw the gospel contained in a man who they called the second Adam, for who, more than Jesus, taught us that the world can throw at us its worst and yet be surpassed by the best. Who, more than Jesus, showed us that deepest darkness, in that deepest darkness, a light outshines it. Who, more than Jesus, taught us to make peace even with the worst case scenarios in life. Who, more than Jesus, taught us that if you're going to love life, you've got to love all, or nothing at all. For life, what is lived outside the garden, while we don't want to love it all, we'd probably choose to love nothing at all if that's the only choice. Because we don't want to love brokenness. We don't want to love pain and hardship, persecution, death. And yet Jesus taught us that when we look into the heart of these things and see past it, we see that yes, there is good and evil in this world, there is light and darkness, but these things are not so easy to differentiate from one another, and that more than these things, more than good and evil, there is simply life. Life that is made far more beautiful when you love all of it rather than merely its bits and pieces. These are the gifts of God for the people of God. I invite our servers to come forward and prepare the feast. And as they do so, I invite you to join me in reminding ourselves of who we are and whose we are. We are an inclusive, open, and affirming family of faith, welcoming all to God's table of love and acceptance. We are diverse, yet united by Christ's example. We care for one another, support one another, and challenge one another to become all that God creates us to be. We work together to nurture our community and to promote peace and justice in our conflicted world. Amen.